Welcome to a new episode of the Stick and Move podcast. I'm your host, Trey. I'm here with my homeboy here, Sam. Today, we are discussing the controversial bout between Gervonta Tank Davis and Isaac Pitbull Cruz. And we're going to go ahead and show you guys our cards. We're going to go ahead and break down a few rounds, give us our thoughts on who won the fight. Did Davis deserve the win, or did Cruz get slighted in his loss? Or both. So we're going to go ahead and go on there, and then we're going to go ahead and transition to our second half of the show where we talk about the top 3 greatest robberies in boxing history. So, Sam, let's go ahead and get started. Do you have any thoughts before we get started?
No, just I'm excited to talk about what we just saw with Tank Davis and Pitbull Cruz, and the whole. He had a 2 week notice to get into this fight, huge
A
fight.
huge fight, right? So let's go ahead and
Yeah.
talk about it without telling me who won. Just let's talk about the lead up to the fight. You just alluded to it, right? 2
hmm
weeks before, Isaac Cruz had preparation. Who is that more of an advantage for? Is that more an advantage for Tank, or more for Davis coming in with such little notice?
No, it's obviously Tank
Hmm.
because Tank was already getting prepared for the Rolly fight, right? And
Right.
he was in training. Um, Cruz didn't know he didn't have anything scheduled. So
Hmm.
I mean, you got to prepare for a champion. You go from being a nobody to fighting a guy that is arguably one of the best 135 pounders there is in boxing.
Right.
With
Right.
the deadliest hook ever, man. Honestly,
Really? You
um,
think so? Really? Wow.
yeah, he has a devastating hook, devastating uppercut. And he's an underrated boxer. I think Tank has skills. You know what I
Right.
mean? He has skills. He just, he's under the whole Mayweather umbrella. So it's
Right.
hard for us to, really see him versus maybe a top 3, top 5 fighter. But, but I mean, who had the advantage? It was Tank. It was Tank.
Okay.
Tank was ready to fight. Tank was ready to go to war.
I agree with you on that one. And let me just say something very quickly. The idea that Isaac Cruz, a relative unknown, I mean, I remember his dad when his dad was a fighter in the 90s. I recall him very much. And I was like, who's this Cruz guy waiting for that Romero fight? And the fact that Cruz came in, I you know, he went in with reckless abandon. We're gonna talk about that in a minute. And the fact that he took this fight without any fear, because let's just face it, you just said it yourself. You believe Davis has the best hook in the game, and he went in there kind of like naive a little bit, and he's like, let me just see if I could take this guy's best shot. And of course, Pitbull took his best shot, and eventually had a great entertaining fight.
Yeah.
So I could see why you would say it's more of an advantage for Davis, because let's also look at it this way. Davis, he's used to fighting in the big spotlights. He had the crowd behind him fighting in the Staples Center, wearing the Lakers shorts and everything like that. And he had the crowd there. They were there for him. And here comes Isaac Cruz, not really known for fighting in stadiums, probably never came even close to fighting in stadiums. And the fact that he gave him this kind of fight just goes to show you the respect that Cruz should get and is getting currently. I think his stock is on the rise, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly. I mean, a lot of people didn't even know who he was getting into this fight.
Yep. So let's go ahead and break it down. Let's go ahead and go straight to the fight. So I'm going to go ahead right now, post our fights here, our scorecards. Okay, wow. Yeah. I see that you have Pitbull here, 116, 113. I had it at a draw at 114, 114. Now, if you look at the media since then, Pitbull is becoming popular. Gervonta Davis's fans, and even I would even say major boxing aficionados, they still say that Gervonta Davis, that was his toughest fight, but clearly won. But according to your card, you think he clearly lost. Why is that? And I know you're a big Tank fan, so this must have been hard for you to score.
Yeah, this was very tough, but I watched the round carefully. Of course, like everybody else, a round at a time, no commentary, just looking at what's going on. I
Yeah,
think a lot of what I noticed is one that a lot of the punches that Tink was throwing were getting blocked, and
right.
a lot of them were missing,
Hmm.
and I mean Cruz was chasing him the whole 12 rounds. Cruz was chasing him. He was
Right.
in his face, and ready to go to war. I think that Cruz showed up to win this fight, and in my eyes, after everything that he did, all the power shots that he did, just chasing Tink around and actually blocking that uppercut that Tink is famous for. I mean, everybody was waiting for the knockout, man. Everybody was expecting a knockout. He couldn't happen. It couldn't happen because Cruz went in there with a great style of defense that he holds, and it was just aggression.
Right.
I had Tank winning. Let's see, it's
You didn't have
five.
him winning to the third round.
Yeah, exactly. I gave even the last 3 rounds, the 10, 11, 12. In my opinion, Cruz won all those 3 rounds. I think
Here's the
he
thing.
finished off the fight quick.
Here's the thing. I love the way Pitbull came out to fight. From the very start of the bell, he rocks Davis or Tank right onto the ropes, almost losing. And even after the first round, he was already his face was already puffy. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh
From
yeah, yeah.
so I think Tank was caught by surprise, and I had the first 2 out of 3 rounds or 3 out of 4 rounds for Pitbull because I saw that aggression. I don't know if it
Me
was
too.
Tank Davis. Um, yeah, I saw you. Yeah, you have the same score as I did
Yes,
before. I don't know if Tank Davis. It took him to the third round to compute that this is a different kind of fight. Because if you ever look at the old fights that Davis was in beforehand, he's never really been challenged, maybe with the exception of Santa Cruz, which we all know became an iconic knockout. But I had Santa Cruz winning that fight going into that knockout clearly. Clearly, I didn't even think, I think I only had Davis winning 1 or 2 rounds going into that knockout. But Davis, to me, or Tank, has had trouble with other boxers that are kind of like brawlers, kind of like oh my god, the guy who fought Gamboa, more like the brawling type. Tank has had issues with that kind of issue, that kind of fighter, and I think what Pitbull did was just catch him by surprise because he probably never even heard of Pitbull as well. And he probably just underestimated him, and he realized in the middle of those fights that he had to change his style. So that's what I
exactly.
first 4 rounds. Go ahead.
Yes. You know what I noticed also is that Tank was looking for that uppercut and
Hmm.
he couldn't find it. He couldn't
Right.
find it. I mean, Cruz had a solid fourth round.
Hmm.
He Cruz had a solid fourth round, and I think it was the seventh or eighth round that they put the camera on Floyd and some
Right.
other guys that were there, and there was concern. There
Hmm.
was concern on like, oh my god, what's going on here? Tank couldn't break that break the shell
Right.
off of Cruz. I mean, Cruz
Right.
just that hiding, tucking, hold that defense, the tight defense that Cruz had, and being smaller in stature, and it was a problem for Tank, man, and
Well,
it was a difficult fight.
that's actually what I want to bring up. That's why I brought up Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was peppering him throughout the entire fight. You can see the frustration that Davis had with Santa Cruz until that knockdown. And I think Pitbull in that 2 weeks studied. I'm not sure if he did or he didn't, but it feels like to me he studied Santa Cruz's major error, which was dropping that guard when he goes in for the hooks and for the uppercuts.
Yes,
'Cause I didn't see Pitbull throw a single jab in this fight. To me, it was all hooks and uppercuts. And that kind of style that Pitbull has with that peekaboo style, it loans well to him always keeping his guard, protecting the left and right side of his face. So he never once, when going in for a uppercut or a hook, he never dropped the guard down so he can wind up even harder. Most
Yes.
boxers, what they like to do, especially when they're fighting a heavy-handed boxer like Javante Tank Davis, they sometimes psychologically feel like I got to hit this guy as hard as I can, and oftentimes you got to let go of your guard so you can wind up properly. But
Mm,
Pitbull kept that composure. He goes, I got enough uh, confidence in my hook and my uppercut to not release the guard and connect through. And he was doing a fantastic job. I think that fourth round was that round, that famous uppercut that Davis tried to do that the announcers got excited for,
yes.
saying, "Oh my God, that was a phenomenal uppercut, clean hit." But we look in the replay; it was all glove, and then
Yes.
they later on said that Tank broke his hand on that part. So
Hmm.
I don't know if that's true or not, but the shell that you're talking about that Cruz had, fantastic, fantastic, fantastic.
I
Which is
agree. I
rare
agree.
because with that peekaboo style, you're often vulnerable to letting go of the guard. But that was my thought within the first 4 to 5 rounds of that fight. You have
Yeah,
any other thoughts?
exactly. No, it was the defense of Cruz that it just became a problem for Tank. You know what I
Right,
mean? He didn't it looked like he didn't expect it at all.
right.
And obviously he didn't. I just felt that in this fight, at least in this fight, um Cruz made the show. If it
Right.
wasn't for Cruz chasing around Tank for 12 rounds, I mean,
Hmm.
he was just chasing him, man.
Right.
He was stalking him all 12 rounds. And I think the problem that Tank had was that he couldn't break through that defense. It became difficult,
Well, that
and go
go
ahead.
ahead. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and that he was getting instructions from Floyd and two other guys in his corner, and
Hmm.
and um, he was caught up with the emotion of the crowd. When he
Right.
slipped a little and the crowd reacted, you know, Tank, acknowledged the crowd. Hey, I slipped. I don't think Tank should be worrying about that.
Right.
Tank needs to concentrate on his fight 100%, just the way Cruz was. Cruz,
Hmm.
his eyes were glued on Tank, man. He did not
Right.
worry about how the crowd was reacting. So there
Right.
was a lot. It was an emotional ride. But I think that the aggressiveness of Cruz and the body shots and Tank running around, for me, in my opinion, gave Cruz the win.
I had round 5 through 9, Tank winning 4 of those 5 rounds. And I
Hmm.
noticed on yours, you kind of had it 5 through 9 pretty much even.
Hmm.
I think you gave an extra one to Tank on that one from 5 through 9.
Yes. Yes.
Um, what I noticed is exactly what you're saying. Tank Davis, in the beginning of the fight, he was, running around the ring a lot. He was getting chased by Cruz. And I honestly think he did feel the pressures from Floyd and his fans to not bring out the show that so many people are accustomed to. Remember, I think he was on a streak of first round knockouts before that fight.
Hmm.
I think that pressure came down on him a little bit. And then in those middle rounds, 5, 6, 7, I had exactly 3 rounds to 0 for Tank because Tank stopped running around. Now, most boxing people would say, well, that's strategy, that's boxing. It's not fighting, it's boxing. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to box. But at some point you got to bring in the fight. And I think Tank felt that pressure, and in those 3 rounds, 4 out of 5 rounds, he was fighting in the middle of the ring with Cruz, and he was utilizing that jab. He wasn't just going uppercuts because he realized that the shell that you're talking about that Cruz had wasn't really affecting Cruz at all. He wasn't punching through his guard like he does for every other boxer. And in the middle of those rounds, he would often stay in the middle of the ring. He wasn't going against the ropes anymore,
Hmm.
as Cruz often pushed him into it, and he ended up taking those rounds for me. But I will say this though: every round that I had Pitbull winning, 100% for Pitbull. There, I don't even think Tank came close to winning those rounds. And obviously, I had half of the fight for Pitbull. Out of the 6 rounds I had for Tank, 4 of them I can honestly say could have gone either way. There was maybe 2 rounds. I think it was the ninth round, and the seventh round, where Tank completely controlled, in my opinion. So, how did you feel about the swing rounds with Tank and Pitbull? Did you have it, or was it just whoever won the round won decisively?
I looked at it. I looked at it carefully, and there was like round five for me. I had it
Hmm.
real close,
Hmm.
and 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 I mean, it was all aggression and
Yeah.
who landed the prettier punch.
Right.
And there was a lot of missed punches that people didn't realize that
Hmm.
that even Tank was throwing. And
Right.
I think the attack mode of Cruz, at least me, as you know, my opinion, I think
Yeah.
that Cruz is what made the fight. If it wasn't
Right.
for Cruz chasing him around, we would have no fight. And
Hmm.
I gave that advantage. And there is people, we have to remember too, there is people that give their opinions and they're like, well, this guy looked, more beat up. He got the, worst end of the stick here.
Hmm.
But you got to remember at the end of the fight, it was Tank that was beat up and they
Right. It
want to
was.
use. And what do you think about the hand issue that people were saying that he broke his hand or something like that?
I will
That he
say in
fought,
that.
you know.
Yeah. Um, I think he probably twisted his wrist because that uppercut in the fourth round, that you just saw the the integrity of his wrist wobble unnaturally. And I'm not saying he broke his hand or he broke his wrist, but he may have sprained it or may have bounced off the glove awkwardly where it kind of rattled Davis. Because if he would have broken his hand, he would not have been able to fight so aggressively. Because after the fourth round, I had him winning the next 4 to 5 rounds. So, it's not like he was hiding his fist on his side rib or anything like that. He kept on being aggressive. I think it was more like a startle kind of thing, maybe a sprain, but nothing more than that. I don't think anything physically really happened to Davis on that fight, besides getting bruised up pretty badly.
Me, I don't really give a shit. A fight is a fight.
Right,
Nobody gave a shit when Manny Pacquiao got a headbutt and was torn, had a forehead that was all torn up. Nobody
right,
cared. If
right,
they say, well, that's fight. That's a fight. That's the way it is.
right.
So
Or
if
Manny
he
or
broke,
Manny Pacquiao's shoulder against Mayweather. You
yeah,
know,
no, yeah, nobody cared. Why should we care
right,
now that, oh, well, he fought him with one hand. He fought him with one hand. No, this is a fight. Injuries are gonna happen throughout the fight.
right.
Nobody gives a shit if there was a headbutt or a punch blew your eyebrow out and there's blood covering your eyes. Chavez fought, or whoever it
Right.
is, they fought. There was no excuse, and so
Uh-huh.
I'm not giving him that pass. The
Neither
fight
am
is Yeah, the fight, the fight went the way it was a great fight. I loved it, the whole 12 rounds. You
I.
know, I just felt that Cruz got the better end of that fight.
Right.
And he gave the crowd what they wanted. I mean, everybody was expecting Tank to knock out Cruz.
Right.
And look what happened. I mean, you know, it was that's just that was that. What about the 10, 11, 12? I saw that you gave the 12th round to Tank.
Yeah, I gave the 10th round. I mean, I'm sorry, the 12th round to Tank. That round, people were expecting fireworks. You saw the crowd in the background, all standing up for the last round. Usually, they'll do that if out of respect to both fighters because they brought in a good fight.
Hmm.
Davis, that first minute, 3 minutes going to two, was he was more aggressive. I think Pitbull was hugging too much for that round, considering it was like the final round. I thought Cruz would have let the round go. In my eyes, what I saw was he didn't do enough to steal that round. That was the round that could have changed everything. And I think Cruz, well, for the to the credit of Davis, of course, you know, stole that round. I think Davis stole that round from Cruz just by putting an early flurry and then hugging him and then kind of dancing around those last 30 seconds to where Pitbull was ineffective. But I see
Okay.
that you gave it perfectly 3-0, especially that last round. So what did you see that last round?
I saw kind of the way you saw it. I
Mhm.
saw Tank Davis throw a couple of good flurries in the first end of the fight, but man, Tank Cruz was just tagging Tank at the end. Pass,
Mhm.
pass, pass. Just even the last 10 when you hear the click for the last 10 seconds, he Cruz throw a combination, all the punches smacked
Right.
Tank. Pom pom pom. And I just feel that Cruz chased him around, plain
Mhm.
and simple, and he smacked him around in the 12th round. That's
You know,
just what I saw.
there is a lot of credit to give to the person that's moving forward, who's always moving towards the fight. This is one of those fights that's going to go down as, I guess you can say, one of those fights that I don't want to say it's going to be forgotten, but more or less that it's going to be remembered as a fight that nobody saw coming. Probably nobody watched because they're
Hmm.
like, who's this Cruz guy? And it's probably been replayed more than actually watched live. So, this is one of those great fights, man. I appreciate this kind of fight. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I want to ask you one question before we get onto our top three, because you kind of brought it up a little bit. You're talking about a little bit of a double standard, how people are giving Tank the excuse that he broke his hand or wrist during this fight, right? Compared to other boxers who get hurt in the ring and they continue fighting, but nobody says anything about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's a fight.
What about the double standard of Tank Davis going the distance with a relative unknown fighter at the time? Yeah, Pitbull has become more famous since that fight. He's undefeated since that fight. But like another fighter that's like him, like Canelo, goes the distance, and then Canelo's considered washed or considered not the same fighter anymore or overrated or something like that. Why is Davis getting the benefit of the doubt with going the distance with an unknown at the time, and other boxers get criticized? What do you think is happening there? Or is it deserved?
No, I think there's just a huge amount of a hatred that comes when you're the greatest, man.
Hmm.
When Floyd experienced that. When
Hmm.
it's somebody that becomes a king, in the ring, the way Floyd was beating everybody. I mean, I've lost money so many times betting against Floyd, and oh yeah, and he's gone the most hate I think out of any boxer,
Sure.
and it just when you're great, man, you just get hated for everything.
Right.
And that's why I think people just hate on Canelo because I mean the guy's getting paid so much money, man.
Right.
And
I agree with you.
it happens to the cash cow.
Right.
So it happened to Floyd, so it's happening to Canelo. That's all it is. It's just hate.
Right. I agree with you. I think as far as Tank not getting criticized for going the distance versus Canelo or any other champ that goes the distance as well, I think it's more of who's been the king the longest. So
Yes.
let's say Canelo retires September, right? And then Tank takes over or Haney or something like that, and they have a good 5-year reign. Eventually, it's going to get to that point to where you're going to expect the knockouts every time. You and I talked about this on an earlier podcast where Canelo kind of ruined going the distance for boxers, where we expect boxers like Canelo and Tank to knock everybody out, and if they don't, they're considered washed up or something,
Yeah.
or
Slowing down.
slowing down, that kind of thing. And I don't think Davis got that hatred from his fans or from the boxing community. They just said, "Hey, Isaac Pitbull is here to come, and now he is. So I guess they were
Yeah.
kind of that. All right, so let's go ahead and transition. We're gonna go into our top three greatest robberies in boxing history. All right, so we can go all the way back from Jack Johnson to as recent of today, as in Cambosa's last fight. Supposedly that was a robbery. We're gonna have to
Oh
do another.
yeah.
But all right, so we're gonna start off with you, Sam. Who is your number three greatest robbery in boxing history?
My number three was that the De La Hoya versus that Felix Sturm guy. That was
Yeah.
my number. That's my number three. I remember seeing this fight, man, and I had never heard of this Felix Sturm guy ever,
Yeah.
and and I remember watching that fight live, and I was like, "What is happening?" De La Hoya is getting outboxed by somebody that's nobody's ever heard of.
Hmm.
Nobody knew who the guy was. This was probably it's another example of a cherry pick gone wrong.
Hmm.
And if you recall that fight, Stern was outclassing him,
Right.
outboxing him. I
Right.
mean, the stamina was out of the roof. I mean, De La Hoya was even heavier, and it was obvious that he couldn't handle that weight.
Hmm.
And De La Hoya he just looked stiff. He couldn't do anything, and Felix deserved that fight, man. He deserved that fight, and it was taken from him. That was one of the first robberies, that I remember seeing that I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed of being, Hispanic, and I felt ashamed being a boxing fan because that
Hmm.
was total robbery, man. That's my number three.
Well, look, for all the people that watch out there, and by the way, we love the support from you guys. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, all under, go follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, all under the Stick and Move podcast. For all y'all guys wondering if Sam and I rehearsed this, my number three is also De La Hoya versus Stern as well.
Oh wow, wow.
Yeah. I mean, but I have a little bit of a different theory. When I watched it, it was one of those 11-1 fights, maybe 10-2, maybe 10-2, but it could have been 12-0, 11-1. But look, De La Hoya at the time, he just came off of losing to Mosley. And if he would have lost this fight, he would have lost two times in a row. And you got to remember, it's like you said, he was gaining weight. He was moving up a class so he can fight the guy nobody else wanted to fight in Bernard Hopkins, because Hopkins was on this tear at the time. So they were trying to create this mega fight before getting to Hopkins. And this was when taking tune-up fights was okay. Nowadays, if you take a tune-up fight, you're considered, you're ducking or something like that. But back
Hmm.
then, they did tune-up fights all the time especially when you're moving up classes. Very important that you do that, but you can't do that anymore. But to the fans out there. But I think this was a fight to set up that big match between De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins, which, considering that De La Hoya just lost to Mosley, he was still the face of boxing. He was the golden boy, the guy that Hollywood loved at the time from LA, right?
Hmm.
If he would have lost to Stern, that would have been back-to-back losses. The Bernard Hopkins Felix Stern fight never would have sold the tickets that boxing needs to sell. So I think that it was one of those where it was kind of set up that way that no matter what happens, I don't know if they told De La Hoya he could take the night off. I doubt that happened. I doubt that De La Hoya had his hand in this decision, but it just felt like, it was no matter what happens, unless De La Hoya gets knocked out, he's going to win so we can set up the
Hmm.
big Bernard Hopkins. So that was my take on my number three, De La Hoya versus Sturm, who was 20-0 at the time too, by the way.
Wow, wow, wow.
So, all right. So let's go ahead and go on to your number two. What is your number two?
My number two robbery. I mean, another shameful Saturday night. was the Julio Cesar Chavez versus Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker.
Okay. Talk.
That look, man. Huge Chavez fan. I love Sweet Pea also. But
Right.
let's be unbiased here.
All
Let's
right.
be unbiased here. Look, bro, what I saw in that fight, I saw a Chavez could not catch Whitaker, bro. He
Mhm.
couldn't catch him. He couldn't corner him. His punches wouldn't land. Whitaker had it's arguably one of the best defenses ever.
Right.
And I mean, when they got in the exchange in the inside, Whitaker won the exchange in the inside. That was a huge robbery. It should have been my number one
Hmm.
because in my eyes, Whitaker won. Believe it, this is I had it. I had it. If I could recall, I think it was um, 7-5 Whitaker.
Hmm.
And I mean, I just saw Whitaker get robbed, man. And the reason
Yeah.
it's huge, they gifted Chavez with a draw.
Right.
The reason that I feel like it could have been my number one, but I got another one. The reason because I feel that that's the fight that changed Pernell Whitaker's life.
Okay. Yeah.
It derailed him mentally. It derailed him career wise. It I think that we would have had. Whitaker deserved that victory, man.
Right.
Whitaker deserved his defense, his technique, the way he escapes. It was just it was just too much for Chavez. It was too advanced for Chavez, in my opinion. And
Right.
and it just it Whitaker gave it all, man. He fought one of the biggest, I mean, the greatest champion, I guess you could say, in Mexico at the time. That Chavez was 87-0.
Yeah, he
Chavez
was.
was 87-0, and that would have changed Whitaker's frame of mind, his career, everything. That's why that was so important, and they took it from Whitaker, man. And that's my number two.
I remember hearing theories about that fight afterwards because you were talking about how Whitaker kind of fell off after that fight
Yes.
mentally. There's
Mm.
a lot of theory out there that yes, Chavez had a hard time connecting, but supposedly, kind of like with Cruz and Davis, the punches that did land on Whitaker were effective, and it could have been one of those situations where Whitaker had never been hit like that, which was why he changed his game plan, where he was mostly running around the ring versus initiating the fight that Whitaker would normally do. That I don't know, maybe it just changed his style a little bit to afterwards being more open in his defense because he would lose to De La Hoya afterwards. He never really rebounded after that fight. So there's a lot of truth to your number two. I like your number two, man.
Yeah, I feel that the judges didn't. It's like me. Remember, we talked about this with defense. I think that the judges for the Whitaker Chavez fight did not give. They didn't care
Hmm.
about your defense.
Right.
They didn't care. They didn't see that as boxing. Those judges
Mhm.
saw, Whitaker's avoiding the fight. You know
Right.
what I
Right.
mean? And
And we've
that's
talked
why.
about that
Yeah,
before.
we talked
We've
about
talked,
that.
and that's we kind of score. You've scored. You just scored on Cruz and Tank, saying that that kind of offense that Tank was doing is not worthy of the win. So, what do you say to that with Whitaker and Chavez? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, no, I just feel that it was a different master class, bro. I mean,
Okay.
Whitaker was just making Chavez look silly. It's too obvious to ignore. I could be
Mm.
wrong with the whole, my opinion with the whole Tank Davis pick Cruz, but when it comes to a robbery like the Chavez Whitaker, it was, dude. I mean, Whitaker is one of the best boxers we ever had,
I agree. I
in
agree.
history, and he's probably the number one a defensive fighter ever. I mean,
I
when people speak of defensive fighters, bro,
Yeah, I think of
Sweet Pea's right there. Yeah. So
I'll
it was
yeah.
just a clowning, bro, in my opinion.
I remember, I have a memory to it where I remember being at a cousin's house and they had like a little barbecue, little asada part barbecue. And I remember in the middle of that fight, just looking at my tios and my cousins and everybody, even like the mechanics that worked in the streets and stuff like that, came over to watch the fight. And it was just quiet throughout the entire fight. They were watching their king go down in a silent beatdown of a defeat. I don't know.
Oh
I don't want to
yeah.
say it was a beatdown. I don't want to say it was a beatdown, but
No, no,
it
no,
was
no,
just
no.
it was just we weren't used to seeing Chavez swing and miss like that. You know,
Mhm.
we were used to seeing Chavez punching through the guard, and we didn't get to see that during that fight. I just remember
Mhm.
seeing my cousins and my tios and everybody just have this look of like, what did we like? The unthinkable just happened. You know,
Yeah.
so
Exactly. So what
I
do you
like your
got as
number
your number
two.
two?
My number two is Pacquiao versus Horn. That's my
Mm.
number two. You know, Pacquiao, he had already been losing at the time, stuff like that. He wasn't the same Pacquiao. I tend to believe, and this might be a controversial conversation, but when he became super duper religious, I think he lost his killer instinct a little bit. And it kind of happened after the De La Hoya fight. He wasn't the same boxer anymore. He was kind of like, he was more into teaching, like giving boxing lessons, in my opinion, at least. I could be wrong. But that Pacquiao Horn, it was fought in Australia. This guy, this Horn guy, I think he had one loss at the time. He was nothing special. He was a tomato can. He was a statue, no flexibility, no bend in his style. He was just a straight up, just jab and move fighter. Nothing, he wasn't quick or anything like that. And I think that's what the problem with this fight was, because people were used to seeing, oh, like people thought that this would be such a big mismatch that Pacquiao would knock him out in the third or fourth or fifth round. But it came off as like this big old like celebration that one of the biggest figures in sports at the time is coming to the humble area of Australia to give this relative unknown a shot. So it had like a homecoming kind of ceremony for this Horn guy to represent his country. And I remember
Apollo Creed
watching
and Rocky.
Apollo Creed and Rocky, where it was, and I even think it was like coined like that, if I'm not mistaken. But throughout the entire fight, like I told you before, we were expecting this flurry bonanza that Pacquiao always gives, and he was just sticking and moving. But here's the thing: it kind of reminded me of Canelo versus Ryder, where it was one of those 11-1, 10-2 kind of fights, 12-0, but more of a boxing lesson. And because
Mhm.
it was a knockout, people were like, did Joe Horn win this fight? And, I look at the scorecards. I'm going to post them right here from the actual judges. They had it all unanimous decision, which we're like, oh, okay, all for Pacquiao, right? We were all surprised that it went the distance anyways, but two of the cards are 113, 115, which meant that any round could have gone to Horn. It would have been a draw. But then there was one card that was 111, 117
Mhm.
for Horn. And, there's always that one judge that's like scoring like crazy. And that, if you're going by scorecards, that's a decisive win for Horn, 3-0 all the way down. To me, that was one of the biggest robberies of all time because it kind of put the kibosh on Pacquiao's legacy. It kind of
Mhm.
ended it. So that's why he's my number two.
Yeah, Terrence Crawford was rooting for Manny Pacquiao because Terrence Crawford was getting the winner of that fight. And yeah, and
Right.
Terrence Crawford did say Manny got robbed, by
So
the way.
that's so funny. That's twice because that is Spence was supposed to fight the winner between Ugas and Pacquiao, and both Pacquiao came up short both times. That's
Wow,
interesting.
wow, wow,
That's
wow, wow.
interesting. That's interesting. All right. So what is your number one, my man?
Mhm. My number one is obvious for millions of people out there, in my opinion,
All right.
is the Castillo and Mayweather fight, bro.
Ooh, our first
Yeah,
episode. Very cool.
yes, yes. The
Talk to
Castillo
me,
and
brother.
May, yeah, Castillo and Mayweather. For a long time, bro. I was, I've seen Pretty Boy Floyd.
Hmm.
I've seen him fight when he fought Diego, and all these great fights that he's been through. You know,
R.I.P.
yeah, yeah, yes. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Dude, finally we get this fight. I didn't think Jose Luis Castillo was gonna be the man. I didn't know he
Mhm.
was gonna be the guy.
Right.
Okay, and you just just like Canelo had haters, Floyd had tons of haters, and
Sure.
so everybody was waiting for him to lose. Of course, for once, bro, we get a fighter, okay, that goes and fights the fight of his life, breaks through the shell, gets
Hmm.
to Floyd, hurts Floyd, outboxes Floyd, takes him to the corner, takes him to the ropes. I mean, he won the fight, bro.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
won the fight. Everybody knew it. Um, I saw the fight again,
Hmm.
and I scored it. And let me tell you something, man. That fight was huge, and it was one of the biggest robberies that I can remember because we had it.
Right.
Code was broken. The Floyd code was broken.
Hmm.
He was exposed,
Right.
and this is the style that's gonna beat Floyd. Of course, Floyd is smart. Winning the rematch, he knows. That's why he's considered one of the greatest.
Right.
Um, but that night, Castillo won that fight, bro. I could watch it
Mm.
100 times and 100 times. Castillo won that fight. Everybody knows it. Everybody
Yeah.
knows it. Even Floyd still talks about it. You
Right.
know, oh, the Castillo fight. People say Castillo beat me, blah blah blah, but they weren't watching this and that. And same excuse. He was saying that he couldn't use one of his arms. I don't know what his shoulder was hurting or whatever the deal was, but it's
Yeah.
always that excuse.
Hmm.
And for me, in my opinion, it was a huge loss for because that also you know derailed Jose Luis Castillo's career mentally, and that's why it was a huge important fight. And in my eyes, at least, and a lot of people's eyes, at least, Castillo won that fight.
We that was our first episode because you and I've talked about that for years already, and I had that fight as a draw the second time.
Hmm.
Uh, that was before Floyd was Floyd, but even when you're watching that fight, you see the tendencies that Floyd is known for using in that fight. That's when he was a little bit more of a brawler, kind of reminded me of a Stevenson today, where he has great defense, but throws down as well. And Floyd later on would become kind of like the 180 of that, more defensive, of course. But
Hmm.
I agree with you. There was more rounds where I felt that Mayweather those rounds that I chose for Mayweather, kind of like the Tank and Pitbull fight, could have gone for Castillo, versus the Castillo rounds that I did have for him. They were definitely for Castillo. And let's not talk about the points that were taken away, or the point that should have been taken away from Floyd Mayweather that wasn't. So I'm cool with that being your number one, because that would end up changing boxing. That was the fight that changed boxing. You can
Hmm.
argue say forever. So I
Yes.
think that's good number one.
All right. How about your number one?
So my number one is back to back Pacquiao versus Bradley Part One.
Oh yeah.
Now, this was actually interesting because I remember watching this fight, and Pacquiao at this time, I think he was like on a 7-year winning streak. I think his last loss was to Marquez before the big knockout to Marquez. 7 years earlier, when he was getting into those wars with Morales and Marquez and all these other great fighters, those lightweights at the time. And when he fought Bradley, for many years, it was already like 4 years in a row, we were waiting for that Mayweather Pacquiao fight to never happen, because there was always BS happening on the Mayweather side, or maybe even the Pacquiao side, depends how you look at it. but it was just never going to happen. And I think when Pacquiao fought Bradley, we kind of already moved on from that idea. It's just not going to happen, right? People that oppose Mayweather, they believe that Pacquiao, that Mayweather just is trying to wait out Pacquiao's prime because Pacquiao was much older. And I think it was a perfect storm because even though that fight, in my opinion, was an 11-1 kind of fight, when they got, and it was a split decision fight, by the way, but when they had Bradley winning that fight, Pacquiao was never the same. The next fight after that, that's when he got knocked out to Marquez, and boxing changed after that. It was kind of like a letdown. So that to me is, yeah, what's up?
Yeah, Pacquiao outlanded Bradley 10 to 12 rounds, bro.
He had over 100 more jabs, if I'm not mistaken, than Bradley. It was a complete domination. And this was actually the first time I ever heard this. This fight would be the first fight I ever heard where, you know what, we need to watch it with no volume. I never heard that before. And I remember, oh, that's a good idea. So I remember watching it with friends of mine. We were watching it with no volume, and we were like, hell yeah, I think it's 12-0 Pacquiao. And, you know, Pacquiao beat him in the rematch, and he beat him again in the third fight, all unanimous decision. So for me, Pacquiao, Bradley won. That changed boxing history because that took the soul out of Pacquiao as a fighter.
Good. I agree 100%. And I read an article saying that the commission sent judges to go get retrained.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah,
yeah, right. they had to go get training because it was ridiculous. I mean, there wasn't, you know, it was that even Bradley was like, I gotta watch the tape again. You know, that was ridiculous, man. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, you have any last thoughts about our list?
No. They're all good. There were all robberies that changed the history and the pace of boxing and the boxers' careers. I mean, look at these guys, man. Look at the guys we're mentioning. You know, these fights were important. These losses could have changed the way boxing is right now. So it was those were good robberies that we picked.
There was I remember you and I talked about this on an earlier episode, and I brought up how boxing has a nasty history of forcing an aged champion to kind of give up his crown to the younger buck.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what happened with Pacquiao Bradley. That here was this guy from American boxer, has a family man. Of course, Pacquiao's a family man too, and I think they felt like because the Floyd Mayweather thing was probably never going to happen, that they're like, you know what, it's time to pass the baton from Manny Pacquiao to somebody else. Maybe we can draw some interest, create a new star. And I think they forced it. And I'm kind of worried that's going to happen to Canelo in this PBC thing. I feel like he's going to go 2-0 or something like that. And then the third fight, he's going to win decisively. And they're going to give it a draw or a win to the new guy. And then we're going to be forced to see a changing of the guard because the powers that be in boxing want a new face of boxing. So,
yeah. I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be Manny Pacquiao passing the crown to Spence, but who gets one? So
yeah, that's true, man.
Yeah, it is what it is, man.
All right, so we're gonna leave it at that. Amazing episode. Remember, guys, follow us, Instagram, TikTok. Make sure you guys subscribe to get our updates, our breaking moment updates on our Instagram and TikTok, all that good stuff, and all at the Stick and Move podcast. And until next week, my man. So until then, don't forget to stick and move, baby.
All right.
I am the greatest. I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass. You won't do shit. Just stick and move. And waking you up and saying, now stick and move.